Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY called Chrysalis Ch.7, written by Beaverfur. Time in warp was, as Dcat thought, a time for reflection, a time spent in transition in that ethereal threshold between the different worlds, in the different cultures, places, and moments that had defied his life. He was now sitting in a small, cold room that he guessed would normally serve as both a canteen and some sort of common area. The austere steel plates and chairs meant to fold into the walls, clearing an empty space in which was meant to play whatever games Invariant ship crews played to pass the time when in space. He almost wished that there was a window in here. Nothing fancy, just a small porthole from which to see the great beyond. But he knew that there wasn't really anything out there to see when in a warp, just a dark, endless expanse, not even the starlight reaching the side of the ship in the little bubble of distorted space. Time in warp was not, by many means, a time that Dcat would call important. It wasn't decisive or memorable on its own. Time in warp wasn't when things happened. No. It was that short vacation, those few minutes or hours in which the being disconnected, inaccessible, was not only justified but expected, in which he could be alone with his thoughts, taking a respite from the trials and tribulations of the rest of the universe went through. But though Dcat wouldn't call this time important, he still thought it was necessary. This, he knew, was a time that existed in between a chapter that had ended and the next that hadn't quite yet begun. The time when he'd take stock of your life so far, let go of regrets, learn from mistakes, and get ready for the inevitable next episode. That slight, changed universe that would be waiting for him whenever he returned to a normal space. And Dcat had a lot of stock to take. The last time he had had such a time to think about, to reflect upon, was when he was left on his home world on St. Kia to report to his new post on the very edge of the galaxy. Under the orders of the ambassador Nakstani, he had been enraged, spending most of his travel time secluded in his cabin, feeling either resentful at the council or sorry for himself and his doomed career. Putting that now it was the very same chapter, one coming to an end, him as a Zinvar, his time learning about the Republic's culture and customs, touring the major worlds, living in the capital and socializing with the elites that visualized the Imperium Palace. His time with Nakstani. They had searched for her, of course. They had flown over the ruins of the Directorate building she had been in when the city was devastated. Dcat had tried to contact through the communicator, hoping that somehow she would have survived the destruction like he himself had, that she might have had the time to grab refuge somewhere safe before the nuclear devices had gone off. Of course, he had known all along it would be a fruitless task, but they had persevered, clinging to one hope, the one in a million chance, up until the Terran had not so subtly forced them to abandon the search. And so it was time to confront the truth. Nakstani was gone, which meant that Dcat was now left to face the changed universe on his own, this galaxy that was spiraling fast into the unknown, into conflict with unforeseeable proportions. The destruction of the colony had been so fast and thorough that it was difficult to comprehend. The first time he had seen the ruined landscape from above as they were leaving the planet in the ship of the Terran had provided them with, his mind had gone back to what he had learned during the previous days in the commissionary agriculture. He had started wondering about the cost of rebuilding these plantations. What techniques would the Zinvarians follow to clean the soil and get rid of the radiation, or how they would go about reprocessing the atmosphere, clearing the dust of the continent-wide fires were raising and turning back to safe, breathable composition. And the more he thought about it, the more he went back to his recently acquired knowledge on the colonial agricultural practices, the more he realized how hopeless that task would be. No, the damage was far too extensive, the wounds too deep to be healed. It wouldn't be worth it from an economical standpoint, not even to a healthy republic, let alone one embroiled in total war. It would be cheaper to start over someplace new than try and bring the dead world back to life. To all effects, the colony of Yovid was dead. The planet would be abandoned, having lost its habitability ranking in a matter of minutes. He sighed, reaching for one of the more small salted cookie-like things in the box he found in one of the room's many cabinets. He didn't feel like eating, but Talzira, the pilot, had suggested he should regain some of his lost strength. The intensity of the attack and the sheer scale of it, how out of proportion it had been. It was puzzling, as if the Terran had not only wanted to defeat the Zinvarians, but to truly and utterly crush them, to tear down everything that they had built, to ruin their future and meticulously extinguish their hopes. If the Zinvarians had been attacked by a civilization of sentient beings, it would speak of a burning hatred, Dcat thought, but trying to figure out the Terran's motivations was, difficult. It could indeed be anger, or it could as easily just be the results of a misfiring algorithm, a rogue artificial intelligence bent on emotionless cleansing and destruction just because of a mishap in its programming. And wasn't that exactly why the development of self-sustaining artificial minds was forbidden by the Council, he thought. At first, when Dowk had woken up alive in the embassy ship cockpit, he had hated the thing, hated the senseless death that it was unleashing upon the Zinvarians, and cursed whatever civilization had created such a monstrosity and unleashed it upon the cosmos. For a second there, he had hoped that whatever species had built the Terran, they had been the first victims of their own cruel creation. And then, just then, the cursed thing had gone and saved him and his pilots' lives, going so far as to provide them with medicine, first aid kits, and a working spaceship in which to escape the doomed planet. So, what had that all been about? Was the Terran sentient after all? Had it taken pity on them and allowed them to live? Or maybe it was just a fluke of luck. Perhaps the presence of other species had triggered some edge condition in its programming, compelling the machine to help them. In that case, the Terran letting them go would be some emotionless as butchering the Zinvarians, just a computer doing its mindless work. But Dcat hoped that it was the former, that those actions spoke of some level of compassion, of regret buried within, of some kind of sentience existing inside the machine, faint as it was, because that would mean that there was still room to understand, to communicate, to, Dcat. The voice of Talzira coming out of the room speaker brought him back to the present. We have just left warp on our first scheduled stop, and I've established a link with the Council. They want to speak to you. Dcat sighed. Time in warp was, by necessity, always too short. It had to be, too short to really matter, too short to become a chapter in its own. The ebbs and flows of the universe always catching up to him in the end, always sooner than expected. He left his cabin and walked through the bare metallic corridors towards the ship's command room. The vehicle and the Terran had constructed was, to put it simply, odd, almost surrealist at places, like if he had caught some sort of dreamlike interpretation of a Zinvarian spaceship. It had corridors that led nowhere and culminated in dead ends, the rooms with no discernible purpose, sections without any illumination whatsoever, while others were so bright it hurt the eyes. He had soon learned not to follow the signs and arrows painted on the corridor walls, since they could easily guide him to his destination, as have him walk in circles in search of a room that didn't exist in the first place. It even had two separate computers rather than one, each independently handling different aspects of the ship's operation. Talzira had grumbled at length about that particular point. He joined the pilot in the oversized command room and took the seat next to her. Talzira had took the beating during a crash, and it showed. Her fur was dirty, with patches of crusty blood here and there where the bandages didn't cover her body. She still had difficulty walking and breathing, but Dowk had hoped that she would recover. He himself had broken his left arm and got cut across his face that would probably leave a scar unless treated soon, with a skin regenerator preferably. But none of his wounds were as severe or extensive as the Definiad's. Upon seeing Dcat, she pressed some icon on a console and gave him a quick nod. "This is Assistant Ambassador Dcat," he said. His voice sounded even more tired than he felt. How many hours had he stayed awake by now? I felt like his visit to the oxygen nitric tree plantation was this morning had happened a lifetime ago. Code 376 Sphere, I'm the highest surviving officer from the diplomatic mission to the Zanbar Republic, after Ambassador Nakstani went missing in action, presumed dead. Dcat, he immediately recognized the frosty voice coming from the speakers. What is your status? Like anyone working for the Council Embassy, he was familiar with the voice of the Lexui, the Zolkrani, the Grand Minister of Foreign Affairs and Diplomacy of the Galactic Federal Council. They had even been in the same room once, almost 3 years ago, along with some 500 other people. So yes, Dcat didn't need the sort of caller identification to know that he was talking to a person responsible for the peace treaty that had ended the Tawarian independence conflict, to one of the co-signatories of the Fifth Accords. What he had never expected is hearing his own name pronounced in the Zectarian sharp, icy fricative voice, the initial D almost turning into a th, Thaucat. And he had been asked to report his status. He realized, better not keep the Grand Minister waiting. Pilot Talziri and I escaped the colony of Yovet and are on our way to Zunva, capital, sir. Are you two the only survivors from the diplomatic mission? We have some support staff in the capital, but yes, Dcat replied. As far as I know, we are the only ones who made it out of Yovet. Did my message to dispatch go through? It did. The Galactic Federal Council declared a Type G emergency 3 days ago, and all its allied fleets are mobilizing to come to the defense of Zimba Republic. 3 days. It was always hard to account for the effects of time dilation. The attack on the Yovet is very recent to him, but it would be old news by now to the rest of the Council. How did you manage to escape? The Grand Minister asked. The Terran, it simply let us go and gave us a spaceship. A silence. I see. You do understand how that might be interpreted by the Zinvarians? Yes, I do, sir, Dcat replied, but I've been thinking about this. Naktani believed the Republic was hiding something from us relating to the Terran, and after seeing how it's singling out the Zinvarians by letting the pilot and me go free, I have to agree. The Republic is more involved in the Terran origins than they are letting on. That's a given. They have admitted to knowing the Replicator's language, for once, and agreed to give us the language cipher. But the question in everyone's minds around here is, do you think the Republic actually built this thing? A cipher, Dcat thought. He would have paid to have that back on Yovet. When he had encountered the Terran, he had felt like an idiot trying to expressionless machine. But he focused on the Zaktarian's question. Could the Republic have built such a thing? No, he replied at last. I'm not sure that fits with what we know of them, and the Terran machine don't look Zonvarian in the least. Not to mention the robotic troops are... No, I am more of one of the beliefs that the Zinvarians found an inert somewhere and activated it. Maybe by mistake. Maybe they did something to provoke it. It would explain why it's only aggressive towards them. But in any case, I'm starting to think the Terran might be sentient enough to negotiate is a possibility. Why? Did it speak to you? No, Dcat said. He believed he had caught a glimpse of something, but now he wasn't so sure of it, to put it into words, much less the words that a Zakanine would find worthy of consideration. Not exactly, though there was some non-verbal communication. The Zimvarian claimed the Replicator is ignoring their communication attempts, even those made using the Terran's language. You yourself said the same thing in your message. Are you retracting that? No, sir. I know what I said, but it could be different if it's the Council that is talking to it, rather than a Zunva Republic. I'm just saying that there might still be some room to achieving a peaceful resolution. I see. I'll pass that to the High Governess. We believe the Replicator's next target will likely be an industrial world of Ch.7. Our fleets are moving in to defend it. So, if there's an encounter, we might try to communicate, though it is not in the planned course of action. Ch.7, Dcat had been there before. It was a small, arid world administered by the Anacax tribe, with a massive industrial output, entire regions of the planet devoted to manufacturing, covering in kilometers-long factories. Ch.7 was the undisputed core of the Republic's economy, and was source of Anacax tribe's enormous political clout. It produced everything from clothes to entertainment screens, to battleships and quantum relays. The capital world of the Zunva was the brain and heart of the Republic. Ch.7 was its muscles. But his thoughts went back to the last sentence the Grand Minister said, not in the planned course of action. Why? Why not give talking a chance, Dcat said, if we might get the Terran to refrain from further attacks. I'm already pushing for that, Dcat, but the ultimate decision belongs to the High Governance. He tried to think of like Nixtani had taught him, ignoring Zaktani's rank, reading between the lines and what he truly was saying. Why would the High Governance decide to attack rather than negotiate with the Terran? Because, they've got a weapon, Dcat ventured, something they think can destroy the Terran. Correct. The scenario is overwhelming attack fleet governed by an out-of-control artificial intelligence has been theorized before, and countermeasures were developed in the case of such a situation ever arose. High governance believes that these countermeasures can trump the replicators. They've got a weapon, and they want to test it. Dcat interrupted, almost laughing, even if that means sacrificing our only chance at negotiating for peace. It's not that easy, Assistant Ambassador. Dcat could detect a hint of irritation at being interrupted in the Grand Minister's voice. The effectiveness of its countermeasure is situational. If the replicator keeps growing strong, it might pass the point of usefulness, becoming immune to it. We simply can't allow the Terran to get too powerful to stop while we negotiate for theoretical peace deals. He understood the reasoning, but he still didn't like it. Not only because of the risk of losing the opportunity to talk to the Terran, but also, it was strange, but he felt oddly in debt and cursed the thing, as if he had to repay it for saving his life, even though it had been the Terran's own actions that had put them in danger in the first place. Was it intentional? Was the Terran playing on that reciprocity that sapient species had in order to make them guess their actions, pit them against each other? Or was it a glimpse at something Dcat thought he had seen? Real. Was the Terran capable of empathy? So you're advocating shoot first, Dcat said, but with all due respect, if it's sentient, we can't just kill it without. If the Terran is sentient, it's still guilty of attempted genocide. The Grand Minister said, we are not the ones shooting first here, Assistant Ambassador, and you know that. I will do my best to ensure communication attempt happens, but if we don't reach an agreement, or if the Terran tries to attack the Zanvarians again, we will destroy it. There are 700 million inhabitants in Ch.7. We can't allow the repeat of the same level of destruction seen at Jovent or Thelmet. The colony world of Thelmet was attacked 16 hours ago, estimated range from 1 to 100,000 casualties. Luckily, overall damage was not as extensive as Jovet's case. Dcat closed his eyes, repressing a sudden urge to scream in frustration. Aye, he said at last. I know how it sounds, sir, how the idea of negotiating peace feels wrong after so many have died, but if we launch our weapon and it fails, then the replicator will consider us enemies too, and we will have lost the chance at a peaceful resolution. I know, said the Zakanine. There's not an easy answer, Dcat, but in any case, this is not in your hands now. I need you back in Zanva to act as a liaison with the Republic's government. Right, Dcat said, and to snoop around until I can learn what it is they're still hiding from us. The Grand Minister let out an amused chuckle. I see Naxtani has taught you well. Oh, and in that regards, I don't think it would be wise to make leadership change of the diplomatic mission during the developing crisis. Translation. Nobody I asked wanted to even come close to that part of the galaxy. And given that you've already extensive knowledge over the Zanvarian culture and contacts in the government, recording you at this time would be counterproductive. Translation. Nobody important will care if you die. So, I believe it would be best if you took command of the mission as acting ambassador until such time as... Translation. The job is yours, but I'm not making it official yet in case things go wrong and I need a scapegoat. Thanks, sir, Dcat said. I'll set the immediate course towards Zanva capital and meet with the Emperor and the Imperial Palace. I'll try and find out what they know. Sounds good to me, and Dcat. Sorry about Naxtani. Right, thank you, Grand Minister. The link closed, and Dcat closed his eyes, breathing deep. To Zanva, then? He asked the pilot. He nodded. How long will it take? She played with the icons and numbers on her console. 37.1 subjective minutes, about 50 hours referential time. 50 hours. By the time they emerged back into normal space, the situation around Ch.7 would probably have resolved already. But for them two, only half an hour would have passed. He nodded again and closed his eyes, not bothering to go back to the canteen for his leg of the trip. Maybe he could get some sleep instead. Time, in warp, Dcat concluded, was an annoying thing. End of chapter. Chrysalis, Chapter 8, written by Beaverfur. Numbers. War, I was realizing, was about numbers and about logistics. The more I thought about it, the more I examined the information I had gained from the spaceports in the worlds I conquered. The shipping manifests and the flight plans, the contents of the downed cargo vessels, the more I realized it was true. It felt somehow wrong to put logistics in front of critical topics of such as military tactics and strategies, intelligence gathering and attack formations. The word itself, logistics, sounds dry and machine-like, a word belonging to a quarterly finance report of a grey corporation, one of those where workers wore uniforms and accountants ruled from behind the cryptic ledgers. A word that felt out of place in a battlefield, almost like an affront, a slap to the face of humanity's long history of military leaders and their genius and maneuvers. And yet it was true. At first, when I left Earth, I had considered myself one of those leaders, a general in command of an army of drones, recurring a subterfuge and clever tactics to best my enemies. The trap I had laid in the asteroid belt was a good example of that. I was carrying the torch, following in the steps of Sun Tzu and Alexander, honoring their past achievements by keeping our military ingenuity alive, even if humanity itself had perished. And, for a time, it had worked, but the more I expanded, the larger my army grew, the less I could keep seeing myself as a military commander. No, I wasn't just the leader, just the commander. I was the state in its entirety, the whole nation. I was the generals, yes, but also the soldiers. I was also the workers back home. I was the factories and the troop transports. I was the truck drivers delivering loads of ammunition in the front lines and the miners extracting the raw resources. I was the dead bodies and the young men training to replace them. I was the system, the supply chains, the economy itself, a well-oiled, self-improving war machine continuously pushing to its working limit. The moment I began to think like that, I started seeing the underlying patterns, the dependencies between which my different factories, drones and ships, the hidden relationships of supply and demand, the unbalances and inefficiencies I could fix. My fleet of drones weren't armies, not really. They were numbers, quantifiable, discrete measurements, a positive and the Zunvarian's negative. War was about numbers. Odd then that I had never been good at numbers, that I had always struggled with the algebra or calculus. With the statistics course I had needed to take in college, I remembered failing to grasp this abstract concepts, asking for help from my classmates when I got stuck with the exercises that I had been assigned. Or had I? It was strange. As clear as my memory of failing the course was, I also remembered teaching those very same concepts to my partners during my time at the institute. Did I become better after college? I cursed again at my fragmented, blurry memories. In any case, it all came natural to me now. It was easy to maximize the function that represented how many more assault soldiers I could produce in the time gained by removing one of the outer plate covers in their design, and whether that gain would compensate for the increased losses during the enemy fire. To optimize the drone swarming patterns as to reduce their total fuel consumption, or to figure out where to attack the Zunvar Republic to create the greatest amount of damage, what node in their economic supply system was the most critical and most valuable. Take this planet in front of me, for example. It wasn't beautiful, not really. Yes, it could support life, had an atmosphere and clouds of liquid water, but it lacked a singular touch, those vibrant colors, that liveliness that Earth had once had, the same one the colonies I had destroyed had also shared. No, the planet in front of me was a dull in comparison. Its scarce clouds weren't puffy white but washed out grey and brown. Its seas were not quite aquamarine but murky, unappetizing. It didn't have those same green, lush forests and endless grass plains from those other worlds. Even the very location worked against it. The orbit of the gas giant, which made it a moon technically, the massive ball of turquoise clouds and its concentric rings stealing all the attention, all the spectacle. Compared to that majesty, the small dull planet floating by was easy to ignore. Irrelevant. Except it was anything but. Looking into the lower part of the EM spectrum revealed the truth. There, the planet shone. It could see the grid-like patterns of its extensive factories and a myriad of transportation networks linking them together. The hundreds of kilometer-wide spaceports dotting the surface, the buried power conduits, energy flowing through them like blood through veins, giving life to manufacturing complexes and refineries the size of cities. The planet was immersed in a sea of radio transmissions, electromagnetic waves emanating from its surface like petals from a blooming flower. There were orbital assembly yards in both cargo freighters and warships still mid-construction, and an almost continuous trail of spaceships entering and leaving its atmosphere, carrying goods and people, following the space lanes that would take them to the nearby systems or to the military processing outputs scattered throughout the gas giant's rings. No, the planet in front of me was anything but dull. It was one of those critical nodes, a junction, a crossroads of sorts, in the supply and production chains of the Zunva Republic. Destroying it, taking it out, would be like removing a keystone from an arch. Halted production lines, entire pivotal industries vanishing and dying, lack of goods and transportation, scarcity, chaos. If I managed to win here, then I could just sit down and watch the Zunva Republic fragmented and crumbled under its own weight, reverting from an interstellar civilization back to a series of smaller, independent planetary nations, which was the reason I was currently approaching the planet, along with 39 of my support ships, an attack swarm of 1,400,000 units strong, and carrying more than 100,000 thermonuclear warheads. Of course, it wouldn't be that easy. The Zinvarian fleet guarding the planet, as I had expected, it was composed of a ragged remains of their navy, huddled together and without any pretense at organized battle formations. It had both the ships and had survived the previous encounters, and those that had strayed into the rear guard. Destroyers in need of repairs, old battleships that should be being decommissioned but had received the last-minute makeover instead, and modern cruisers straight out of the assembly line, their hulls still bare without any paint coating. Them I had expected. It was the other fleet, the one that was almost 7 times as large as the Zimbarians, that looked like a mismatched congregation of warships in all of its origins and colors, some flashy and elegant, others curved and bulbous, some narrow and agile, others powerful and sturdy, and one of those ships' flanks were turned towards me. They blocked my path to advance towards both the planet and the Zinvarian fleet. That one I hadn't expected. The sight was imposing. It was meant to be. So many enemies, so many species, so much destructive power gathered against me. Their missile batteries, their hundreds of energy beam projectors, all aimed at either my support crafts or my own body. It was a message that required no words. The communications beyond language, the kind that could be found in the African savannah when 2 predators faced each other over a downed corpse. Which, of course, reminded me of the African savannah that did no longer exist. If I had any doubts and uncertainty, they vanished. I kept my approach. With the thought, I released my swarm of drones, setting it to a swirl around my body and naming support ships, blanketing us in a protective, shifting field. This time the message and the radio signals didn't come from the Zivarian fleet. It was the newcomers who talked, and they didn't send their communications in dozens of languages, didn't repeat it. It was delivered once in English. Hostile approaching fleet codenamed Terran. This message from the Galactic Federal Council. The Zunva Republic and the planet of Annax Farvan are under our protection. Cease immediately your approach or you will be destroyed. This will be your only warning you will receive. The word irked me. Terran, as if the only relevant thing about me. The only connection I still had to my origins from being Earth, as if I wasn't worthy of being called human anymore. But I pushed that thought aside and considered the situation, the fact that the Galactic Council was siding with the Zinvarians and that they knew of my origins. How else did they know? Were they aware of my nature? Did they know that the Zinvarians had done to Earth? Or maybe they themselves been complicit in the destruction of my species? A sickening thought crossed my mind as I remembered the 2 aliens I had let go. Had they gone running back to their home worlds, crying about the big bad monster rampaging through the Zinvarians' territories? Was their presence of the fleet here my own fault, something that I could have avoided had I gunned down those 2? Was their response to my attempt to coexist? So much for the olive branch. I considered ignoring the message, as I did always, but I didn't want to. Not this time, because the ones sending it weren't the Zinvarians themselves. Maybe because I didn't want to justify their views about me, to solidify my status as a sort of mindless villain. It's not that I really cared about much what they thought, but I still had myself to answer to, and in some way I wanted to stand my ground, to be heard, even if they ended up siding with the Zinvarian anyway. "Dave," I transmitted back, "you are not my enemies. I don't wish to fight you." Strange to speak again. Ever since I woke up in the ruins of Earth, I hadn't pronounced a word, hadn't needed to use my voice modulator. I remember thinking that I would always be alone, that I wouldn't talk to anyone again. It seemed that I'd been wrong about the latter, at least. A few seconds later, and without response, I guess they weren't expecting me to talk back, and were just going to go through the motions when they had sent their warning. I felt a faint amusement at the idea of just speaking for those few words that I'd already thrown a wrench in their actually carefully laid plans, sending them off script. Where are their generals discussing how to proceed right now, calling their leaders back home and asking for instructions, the different species that were represented in the fleet arguing with each other. I guessed that was one of my advantages, of not having to spend any time talking, convincing, coordinating different people and their agendas. No, my thoughts translated into plans and actions with the same speed and ease that I had once had to move my own body. "Terran, we are glad that you decided to communicate." The reply was at last. The voice still had a synthetic tone to it and told me that they were using some sort of translation tool, but the rhythm and intonation was slightly different, as if they had switched over from behind the microphone. "We hope that we can reach an agreement in the end of this, and we want to welcome you to the galactic community, provided you are willing to meet certain conditions. However, you must stop your approach immediately. Your unwarranted attack on the Zunvar Republic—" "Unwarranted," I interrupted. "The Zunvarians destroyed my world, exterminated my own species, down to the last one of us. If anything, I've been merciful so far." A pause. "Those allegations are new to us," they said. "We'll start investigations regarding your claims. Should they prove true?" "They are true." I accompanied my response with a compressed info package of evidence, videos, and audio recordings of the destruction of some of Earth's cities. I see. We will examine the information. If we determine it to be authentic, we can guarantee that the appropriate sanctions and provisions will be applied. We will also take it to the consideration when judging your own recent actions. We can be lenient, but in return we need you to meet some midway and agree to our conditions." "What conditions?" "First, you need to stop your attacks right away. Second, you will return to the conquered system back to the Zunvar Republic and dismantle any resources, extraction outposts, and factories that you might have built in them. Third, you will refrain from any sort of exponential growth and limit the construction of new ships and machines to a linear rate, which will have to be verified by a team of observers from the Council." A deep anger started boiling inside of me. Did they think I was that stupid? "Right," I said. "So you want to disarm me, reduce me to the point where I can't fight back, where you can simply finish me off and complete the job the Zunvarian started?" The answer is no. That is not our intention, Terran. Our objective is merely to prevent more loss of life. We can guarantee that your existence and your rights as a sentient being will be respected, and that— Can you guarantee justice? That the Zunvarians will pay for what they did? I hadn't reached the Council fleet yet, but I already ordered the drones to begin accelerating towards it, grouping them into smaller squadrons according to their attack patterns. "Justice, yes," they replied. "Justice according to the law of the Galactic Federal Council. An impartial trial driven by logic rather than emotion, when the Zunvarians can exercise their right to a defense, with economical and political sanctions in case they're found guilty, with those directly responsible going to prison. But not this. What you're doing is not justice. It's vengeance. So, a slap on the wrist, in other words. You are siding with them. Terran, we are not siding with— Yes, you are. You might not directly be responsible yourselves, but you are enabling their behavior. They commit a genocide, murder an entire species, and they get to keep going. They get to have a future, and one they denied us. Oh, this here is what they deserve, and even this will just be a fraction of what they unleashed on us. I had my support ships angle the flanks towards the enemy vessels, the laser projectors I'd installed in them locking into targets. You can't pretend to fight for the whole galaxy and win, Terran. This does not have to end like this. Stop now, and we can discuss— No, I said. Not until they've paid for what they've done, until humanity has had its retribution. We have discussed enough. I don't want to be your enemy, but if you side with the Zenvarians, if you try and stop me from doing what is only fair, then you will be no better than them, and I will fight you. This is the only warning you will receive." With that, I ordered my 5 large escort ships to open fire on the Zenvarian destroyers. Its protective shields came up immediately, wrapping them targeted vessels in a familiar-looking soapy bubble. The war was about numbers. It was about the output of the Zenvarian destroyers' power plants pitted against the combined potential fire of escort ships, of efficiency of its radiators, emanating immense energy as the shields was receiving back into the space's heat, against the performance ratio of my re-engineered laser projectors. The destroyer exploded, wrapped in a blue flash. The Council fleet opened fire, targeting my main body and my support ships. The field projectors I had installed kicked into action, withstanding the barrage as they drained energy from the ship's inspective reactor plants. My swarm surged forward. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of drones accelerating, a thick mass of ever-shifting formations, corkscrews and fractal patterns and combined movements of its constituted units, making it look like it was some sort of gigantic living organism, morphing and changing and pulsating, always evolving. But I knew where each drone was. I was in control, sending radio commands to each one of them, simultaneously telling each and every one of them how to move, where to go, receiving their responses, analyzing their feedback. Their sensors were always sending back to my central processing units. My mind integrated the information into a complete picture, the drones becoming a part of me, a mere extension of my will. I always knew which one of them carried laser projectors and which transported my army of assault soldiers. I always was aware of each thermonuclear warhead was. Those I switched positions, kept them in permanent motion, weaving them in and out of formations, making sure that they were hard to track by the enemy computers, easy to miss by a sea of machines, as if I was playing the shell game with the enemy fleet, with the thousands of simultaneous moves, one where the numbers were disproportionate and the stakes deadly. I aimed most of my assault soldiers towards the Council fleet. I guessed it wouldn't be easy, but I wanted to capture some of the unusual ships. I'd already learned that all the Zenvarian war technology had to teach me, and I was ready for the next step. If the crashed vessel that I'd found in the destroyed colony was any indication, the Council species were more advanced than the Republic, and it looked like reverse engineering their technology could give me an extra edge. I'd set my eyes onto 2 of the largest ships in particular. One was a marble white, its polished surface glinting under the vibrant light of dozens of energy beams crossing the battlefield. It reminded me of a giant bone, as if I was looking at a femur of some titanic creature. The second target was the biggest battleship in their midst, a starfish-looking thing with iridescent blue and green colors. Its ventral energy weapon was activated, sending a continuous stream of heat and energy that went crashing into the shield that protected my main body, dwarfing the other attacks I was receiving. That amount of power, that sheer strength of that weapon. Yes, I wanted to take over that one ship. The amount of damage my body shield was receiving from that large one was enough that I expected it to collapse in less than a minute. So I had to recur to my escort ships. I ordered them to get close to my body and to willingly put themselves in front of me, right in the path of the energy beam, to take the full onslaught for a few seconds at a time. It was a complex maneuver, but it worked. As the shield in one of the ships was about to collapse, it moved out of the way to be replaced by the next one, all of them sharing the load in turns, helping each other so that none of them would be destroyed. As the front of my swarm neared the enemy formation, a few of the smaller council ships moved forward. The gold and green wedge-shaped frigates positioned themselves at the front of the fleet, between my swarm and their most valuable battleships, and opened fire with my drones with laser projectors. Unlike what the Zenvarians had accustomed me to, the lasers weren't powerful. They didn't burn with the intensity of a small sun, weren't designed to take out battle-class starships. No. These were low-energy, thin white trails of light, but they had dozens or hundreds of them, each projector swiftly tracking a drone down and burning it down, then rotating towards the next target without pause. It was a good move, a good counter to my usual tactic. The Council had decided to go with quantity over quality for energy weapons of their frigates. Apparently, they were aware of my drones lacked shields, and so had correctly deduced that even a weaker laser would be enough to dispatch them. Rather than firing the one too powerful beam of energy at a single drone, they had opted for firing tens of less powerful ones, each at a different target, allowing them to burn faster through the swarm. Yes, a good move. I would have tipped my hat. It was a pity that they were acting on outdated intel, though. I had installed shields in all of my drones, of course. That would have been prohibitively expensive. No, what I'd done was designed a new kind of support unit, one that only carried a shield. Nothing else. I'd built it and placed several thousand of them scattered throughout the swarm. I set these shield drones to move forward now, accelerating through the thick of the swarm. The other crafts under my control moving out of the way as in a choreographed motion that let them reach the front of the battle faster. With a thought, their shields came online, and thousands of new soapy bubbles appeared all over the place, each one a few 100 meters wide, more than enough to cover both the machine casting it and its closest neighbors, as if it was an oversized umbrella with room for the entire group of people. It wasn't nearly enough to cover my entire swarm, of course, but I didn't need to. I only needed to provide protection to the front lines, so to speak, to the drones leading the charge, the ones most battered by the onslaught of the enemy fire. To their credit, the council commanders reacted fast to the new development, as one of their frigates stopped spreading fire amongst the multiple machines and started focusing the beams into a single target, trying to get the one shield drone down at the center of each bubble. The previous decision to mount separate and weaker energy beams hindered them here. In the battle of numbers, focusing several independent laser projectors into a single target was less efficient than using a single, more powerful beam to begin with. There was simply more energy lost as the heat had to conduct a resistance, more wasted power. Ironically, they would have been better off now had they just tried one good move against me in the first place. My shielded drones weren't perfect either. They were small craft after all, their power plants not really capable of offsetting the combined attacks of the bubbles they were receiving for too long. So now and then their shields would collapse for a couple of seconds at a time, and their generators needed to cool off. They vent off the heat into space before the shields could be re-engaged again safely. 2 seconds of vulnerability for every 12 seconds the shield was up. Didn't seem like much, but it was more than enough for the enemy laser beams to destroy the drone casting it. So I ordered the machines inside each protective bubble to swirl around the central shielded drone, making an orbiting movement, spiraling clockwise and counterclockwise without ever leaving the protection of the spherical shield. It was an attempt at confusing the enemy's tracking systems, difficulting their targeting and the shield caster. I even went so fast as to synchronize their movement with the bubble's vulnerability periods, so that whenever the shield temporarily went down, 1 or 2 of my disposable drones would just happen to be in the path of an incoming beams, sacrificing themselves to protect the critical shield unit. It was maddening, the amount of radio traffic that was empty space, the amounts of information I was sending and transmitting with every single second, the stress of coordinating the movements of more than 1 million vehicles, of making sure one of them was at the right place at the right time, of tracking the enemy projectiles and calculating their future paths, of that my machines could dance around. I had never fought like this. It was crazy. It was intense. It required my every thought, my every processing cycle. And I loved it. I cherished every second. I was making nested fractal patterns, designing paths that followed Fibonacci spirals that drew sequences inside sequences, numerical programs that manifested as whirling formations, apparent chaos that spontaneously resolved into order before disappearing again. The drones moved with fluidity, weaving in and out of complex evolving configurations that I didn't even have time to concisely register before they were gone. With no room for a second guessing, no time for overanalyzing my decisions, I was acting on pure instinct now, an instinct I didn't know I had, sending orders and applying patterns just because they felt right. And they were right, pure. It was a thing of beauty, of numbers that only I could see, a work of art only I could appreciate, that nobody else knew even existed. And as the battle raged outside, as missiles crossed the skies and ships died in explosions blinding the senses, and whirling drone formations warped around battleships, I was fighting an inner battle of my own. every bit as intense. My processing units were in overdrive, my server farms burning hot. I was shifting through oceans of information, analyzing and correlating the projecting thousands of paths into the future, sending orders and receiving torrential amounts of input data by millions of eyes, constructing models of the battlefield and optimizing data strategies, prioritizing targets and going through massive indexes to find the key attack patterns I needed to use. I had drones surround the Vanguard Council frigate, spiraling around them, cutting their hulls open with dozens of moving laser beams. I discarded an entire dataset when I realized the battlefield had moved towards the upper levels of the brown planet's atmosphere, the minuscule drag creating us by scattered atoms of nitrogen and oxygen nullifying some of my projections. Not by much, but I was standing over a very narrow edge, working at a very limit of my machine's abilities. Drones sometimes flying right by each other with only 2 or 3 meters to spare. I had to be perfect. 2 Zenvarian battleships tried to flank the thick swarm, taking advantage of the confusing battlefield. But I wasn't confused, and I had already estimated the high likelihood of their maneuver and had placed 10 nuclear warheads in their predicted path. I detonated them now, the battleships vanishing inside the bright flashes. My assault soldiers were now crawling across the hulls of the targeted battleships. I had them look out for entrances, blow open vents, and force their way through narrow openings. I was winning, despite the unexpectedness of a new and numerous enemy, despite the higher technology of the Council fleet was deploying, despite their clever tactics designed to counter mine. I knew I was winning. The enemy fleet had managed to contain the tide of the swarm somewhat, but I knew their defensive positions were compromised. Their entire formations would collapse. I had only had to push a bit further, a bit harder. And then everything changed. It felt like a slap to the face, like being showered in a cold water out of the blue. I wasn't entirely sure of what had happened, but I immediately knew that something was very wrong. My view had fragmented. I could no longer hold a cohesive picture of the battlefield in my mind, and I couldn't integrate all the information that I was receiving from my drones into a single model. Instead, I now had separate views, conflicting narratives, drones popping in and out of my awareness, blinking like Christmas lights, as if they were being destroyed and immediately brought back to life. And I wasn't sure of where exactly any of my machines were anymore. I had 2 or 3 different positions for each, as if they had somehow doubled in my mind. I was still trying to direct them, but their movements were turning spasmodic. My orders were inconsistent, and I couldn't visualize the swarm as a whole anymore. My careful, constructed patterns and formations were unraveled fast as drones collided into drone, and as they drifted out of the protective bubbles and were promptly destroyed as an order into chaos. I felt a cold fear in my gut, a sinking feeling. Something was very wrong here. Was the problem caused by my own mind? Somehow, had any of my server farms crashed, crippling me? Was I having a virtual stroke of sorts? I launched a desperate quick diagnostic process to check my own data banks, my own processes and internal systems. It was basic analysis, I knew, but everything looked okay. So what was it then? I turned my attention towards a single drone, ignoring the rest of the now disorganized swarm. I ordered it to engage its thrusters and move forward. It didn't. The cold fear turned icy. I repeated the order. This time the machine obeyed, moving forward, but something had happened. The drone was still reporting as being in the old position, even though I could still see it move through the visual sensors of my own body. The mismatch caused it to double in my mind, as if it had suddenly turned into 2 separate machines, one still and the other moving forward. Odd, disconcerting, nauseating. I told the machine to stop, but it ignored me and kept advancing, getting into the path of another drone. The 2 craft collided at high speed, destroying each other. Had all my drones suddenly turned stupid, and the enemy hacked them? No. I noticed that they were still following the programming, their last orders. It was more like they, I glanced into my low EM spectrum, paying more attention to the transmissions I was receiving, both from the drones as well as the background radio waves coming off the planet, and then it clicked. The problem wasn't my drones, nor was it my own processing units. No, they were all working fine. The problem was that I was being jammed. The Zenvarians had tried that before, of course. They had tried to drown out my communications in deep blanket EM noise, or use EM pulses against me. But inevitably they had failed. My signals had always come ahead. My transmitters too strong, my drones' electronics too well shielded and designed to work in an environment where nuclear warheads were going off left and right. I couldn't be jammed, except the Council apparently found a way. All the orders I was sending to my machines, all the feedback the drones were relaying back to me, it was all scrambled, distorted. All signals, all radio transmissions I was receiving or emitting were garbled, warped, and doubled or tripled, just like a passing through some sort of strangely curved kaleidoscope. When I glanced into the EM spectrum, I felt like I was watching a world through the eyeglasses that didn't quite fit my spectrum. I didn't even know such a thing was even possible, let alone that they were doing it. Some of my messages would survive the process relatively intact, and parts of the information on the drones we were relaying still contained some consistency by the time they reached me, which is why I still had some degree of control, spasmodic as it was, but it wasn't enough, not to fight at a level I needed. War was numbers, and I had just lost mine. As if to cement that thought, the enemy fleet opened fire with all of their energy beams at the same time, with a salvo of missiles, ignoring the swarm, focusing all their fire, all the destructive power on a single target. Me. My shields kicked in, my power plant struggling to keep up under the combined barrage. I started expanding my radiator panels to vent the excess heat, even though I knew doing so with combat would risk the delicate surface getting damaged. But I needed an edge. I needed that extra 5% of efficiency I knew I could get when I wanted to survive this attack. That was when the supercharged beam of Starfish battleship opened fire again, targeting me. I only had a fraction of a second of warning before my shields would give away. I could feel pain, I discovered, a very toned-down version, not the kind of pain I remembered feeling in the past, not like that one time when I had accidentally cut my hand with a kitchen knife. No. This was different, muted, but oddly similar. I felt the impact, the heat, the shock, the loss, the failure. Powerful energy beam burned through my ceramic plates, straight past my second and third armor layers. It vaporized its way through the internal storehouses and drone assembly factories. It cut fuel lines and energy conduits. I watched through the cameras inside my body as the expanding ball of flames and heat advanced along the kilometers worth of maintenance corridors. Walls bursting, sensors dying, and platforms collapsing in its wake. I didn't have time to take stock, no time to evaluate the damage I had just received before the next impact, the next laser beam cutting deep into my structure and destroying one of my auxiliary thrusters, the resulting explosion shocking my entire body. They were killing me. End of chapter. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please consider supporting the author from the link down below. Otherwise, if you wish to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so, like liking, subscribing, and possibly even becoming a patron. Otherwise, the easiest way would be to share. And until the next video, I hope that you all have a good one, and I'll see you then. Cheers.